Well, I'm going to talk about another piece now, Chuck. Chuck Lewis, you're quoted in this major article in the latest issue of the New Yorker magazine by Jane Mayer that profiles billionaire brothers Charles and David Koch, who have quietly given more than $100 million to right-wing causes. Jane Mayer writes, quote, "In Washington, David Koch is best known as part of a family that's repeatedly funded stealth attacks on the federal government and the Obama administration in particular. With his brother Charles, who's 74, David Koch owns virtually all of Koch Industries, a conglomerate headquartered in Wichita, Kansas, whose annual revenues are estimated to be $100 billion. The Kochs operate oil refineries in Alaska, Texas, and Minnesota and control some 4,000 miles of pipeline. Koch Industries owns Brawny paper towels, Dixie cups, Georgia Pacific lumber, Stainmaster carpet, and Lycra, among other products. Forbes ranks it as the second largest private company in the country after Cargill, and its consistent profitability has made David and Charles Koch, who years ago bought out two other brothers, among the richest men in America. Their combined fortune of $35 billion is exceeded only by those of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. The New Yorker piece goes on to say the Kochs are longtime libertarians who believe in drastically lower personal and corporate taxes, minimal social services for the needy, and much less oversight of industry, especially environmental regulation. Jane Mayer goes on to write, quote, "Indeed, the brothers have funded opposition campaigns against so many Obama administration policies, from health care reform to the economic stimulus program, that in political circles, their ideological network is known as the Kochtopus." Koch Industries has a response to the New Yorker article on its website. It reads, quote, "We submitted extensive facts and background information to the magazine. Given that all we provided did not change the publication's negative, unbalanced tone and agenda, we declined their request to speak to Koch executives. The story dredges up issues resolved long ago and mischaracterizes our business philosophy and principles, our practices and performance record, and the education efforts and policies we support." It then goes on to address specific points like their environmental record, climate change, the group's Americans for Prosperity and Citizens for a Sound Economy, healthcare reform, and so on. Well, Chuck Lewis, talk about the significance of these oil billionaires, the Koch brothers, and what their money, at more than $100 million funneled into right-wing causes, including climate change denying groups, has meant.
Well, yeah, I've been following the Koch brothers now unofficially, I guess you'd say. I mean, when I ran the Center for Public Integrity for 15 years, I first brushed up against them because they were one of Bob Dole's top 10 career patrons. And then I wanted to see
by the way, is spelled K-O-C-H for people who've seen it but didn't know how it was pronounced.
Right, not the soft drink, yeah. Anyway, I started noticing this company some years ago. It is true. They have, I think the 100 million number may be a very conservative number by the New Yorker and by Jane Mayer. And by the way, the Koch Industries company and the Koch brothers essentially planted a very fawning profile of the Koch brothers in the New York magazine days before as a way of preempting the New Yorker article. And they never consent to interviews. I tried to interview them for 2 different Buying of the President books, and they had no interest whatsoever in talking, and in one case they mildly threatened to sue. So they are these are a very aggressive brothers, and of course among the wealthiest people on planet Earth. What makes them different? We have seen rich people try to influence politics in America since the beginning of the Republic. What makes them unusual, and I've been around Washington since roughly around Watergate in the mid-'70s, what makes the Koch brothers unusual is the amount of money that they have spent, and done it in a stealthy, undisclosed manner. But folks have found out over the years how much the money is, over $100 million, and it's probably much larger. That is almost entirely spent to further the interest of Koch Industries. They are ideologues. Their father, Fred Koch, who started the company, was part of the John Birch Society, and so we're talking extreme right-wing ideologues. And to say that they believe in free enterprise is almost too mild to describe their politics. But what they have done is they have tried to subvert legislation that they saw would impact on their company. Let me give you an example, and this is where I discovered their activities in the mid-90s. I noticed not only that they were one of Robert Dole, then Senate Majority Leader, running for president against Bill Clinton, not only were they among his biggest donors ever in his long 44-year career, but I also noticed that they funded this thing called the Citizens for a Sound Economy, which there was no disclosure of the donors, but it was obvious they had given huge amounts of money, millions of dollars. They were being prosecuted for 300 oil spills by the Customs and EPA and Justice Department, parts of the federal government. And they asked the Senate Majority Leader to insert in the so-called regulatory reform legislation a clause that would get rid of any current prosecutive effort by the U.S. government against Koch Industries. And it was the person writing the draft for that legislation was the chair of the board of Citizens for a Sound Economy, former White House counsel in the first Bush administration, Boyd and Gray. This did not work because several people died from bad hamburgers from an E. coli outbreak, and the public started to realize that maybe we do need regulation. And the whole idea for regulatory reform kind of eased, and that thing kind of went away. But the fact that this company tried to manipulate things to that extent just astonished me. I've never seen a bare knuckles move like that, quite so obvious. It was then discovered that they had cutout groups called Triad, and they were running attack ads in 16 states, running it through a third-party, another third-party cutout that were nonprofits running these outside group attack ads, and all the people being attacked were Democrats running against free enterprise Republicans in places where they had manufacturing facilities. And so their activities are not only substantial and almost entirely undisclosed in terms of how much they spend and where, but it's virtually entirely for the furtherance of Koch Industries. And that's what makes them so extraordinary in my experience. I've never seen anything quite like these guys. And I did say in the Jane Mayer New Yorker article that Koch Industries is the Standard Oil of our time. This is a very powerful, almost entirely unknown company that is exceedingly aggressive in its tactics and its political maneuverings.
I mean, it's very interesting because on the one hand, they're funding of Tea Party and Tea Party organizations around the country that are growing.
Right.
On the other hand, they're funding for the arts. The article by Jane Mayer called Covert Operations, the Billionaire Brothers Who Are Waging a War Against Obama, begins with a scene at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York where they're honoring, it's the 70th annual Spring Gala of the American Ballet Theater. David Koch is being honored. He'd recently given $2.5 million to the company's upcoming season. He was standing next to Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg. Only Michelle Obama wasn't there, who was supposed to be there, and maybe we now know why, though they said a scheduling conflict. The Kochs have donated $1 million to modernize Lincoln Center's New York State Theater building, which now bears its name, David Koch's name. He's given $20 million to the American Museum of Natural History, whose dinosaur wing is named for him. This spring, after noticing the decrepit state of fountains outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art, he pledged $10 million to renovate them. And he serves on the board of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where after he donated more than $40 million, an endowed chair and research center were named for him. Now, later in the piece, it's very interesting because it talks about the fact that Koch Industries became a major producer of formaldehyde after it bought Georgia Pacific, the paper and wood products company, for $21 billion. So Jane Mayer asked James Huff, an associate director at the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, a division of the NIH, about this. He said it was disgusting for Koch to be serving on the National Cancer Advisory Board. Huff said it's just not good for public health. Vested interests should not be on the board. He went on, those boards are very important. They're very influential as to whether NCI goes into formaldehyde or not. Billions of dollars are involved in formaldehyde. And then she quotes Harold Varmus, the director of the National Cancer Institute, who knows David Koch from Memorial Sloan Kettering, which he used to run. He said at Sloan Kettering, a lot of people gave to us, had large business interests. The one thing we wouldn't tolerate on our board were board members' connection to tobacco. When told of Koch Industries' stance on formaldehyde, Varmus said he was surprised. Charles Lewis. Talk about the link between the chemical companies that they're involved with and also just the Koch brothers' funding of Tea Party movements and organizations.
Right. You know, the chemical companies, the Center for Public Integrity investigated formaldehyde, and the chemical companies and the industry in general has always tried to, of course, to avoid regulation, to keep formaldehyde legal so they can continue to make money. And they have infiltrated groups like the American Cancer Society and all kinds of other groups. So industry is getting in the face of and in penetrating inside the federal worlds of these regulatory agencies, as you know, a long and old and very sad story. That article also mentions the Smithsonian has an exhibit that basically has clearly climate change, sort of conservative / oil industry rhetoric about that whole subject of how the world has evolved and how warm is it getting and all that stuff. And the idea that there's this is the Koch wing of the Smithsonian, but then you find out that the exhibits kind of reflect the Koch industry's view of the world, this oil company's view of the world, is, I think, incredibly disturbing. If I was a trustee at the Smithsonian or these other places, or Congress having oversight, I think these are significant issues. I don't know the extent to which anything will happen, but it's outrageous. You know, I have followed Koch pretty closely, but I didn't actually know about the Tea Party involvement, really, to the extent that Jane Mayer lays it out. It's totally predictable that now that I think about it, because they also helped to fund the term limit movement and the Libertarian Party as far back as 1980. Libertarians, of course, don't believe in any environmental regulation. And so the Tea Party thing is just the latest example, but as Jane points out, is the most populist one. They've actually found a public out there, so it's not a top-down. It's actually, it starts to have the public appearance of being grassroots. What most Americans don't know is that these folks are trained by and taught, educated, quote unquote, by Americans for Prosperity, a Koch industry group. So now we know who's funding the Tea Party movement, and I think this article is a very constructive thing for the public to get the truth about what's really going on with these folks.
And you have President Obama actually naming them. Jane Mayer says the Kochs have long depended on the public's not knowing details about them. They've been content to operate what David Koch has called the largest company you've never heard of. But with the growing prominence of the Tea Party and with increased awareness of the Koch's ties to the movement, the brothers may find it harder to deflect scrutiny. Recently, President Obama in Austin at a Democratic National Committee fundraiser said he warned supporters that the Supreme Court's recent ruling in the Citizens United case, which struck down laws prohibiting direct corporate spending on campaigns, had made it even easier for big companies to hide behind what Obama said were groups with harmless-sounding names like Americans for Prosperity. Obama said they don't have to say who exactly Americans for Prosperity are. You don't know if it's a foreign-controlled corporation or even, he added, a big oil company. Last 30 seconds, Charles Lewis.
Well, this is a problem we have, and it's a problem we have with both parties, of these cutout groups that have nice-sounding names, and we have no idea what they're doing. It's dangerous for a president, in a way, to single out a group, because Bill Clinton tried it during the health care debate, and it brought the president of the United States down to the level of a trade association or a nonprofit. But what Obama said is correct. We don't know who these people are. We don't know what they're about. No, there should be disclosure about these groups, and there isn't. And, you know, we have a wild and untenable atmosphere when it comes to political discourse in this country, because money is going to rule everything here. It already has for years, and it's going to get worse.
Charles Lewis, thanks so much for joining us, founder and former president of the Center for Public Integrity, now teaching investigative reporting workshop at American University. We will link to Jane Mayer's very important piece in the New Yorker magazine called Covert Operations, the Billionaire's Brothers Who Are Waging a War Against Obama. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
Is the power line, is the poverty line.